So today in the Legal No, Vincent J. Russo is going to address whether children are entitled to inherit from their parents' estate. You know, Vincent, it's so good to have you, but I always leave with more questions than I begin with. But not because you just stir up a lot of things that we don't often think about. This is one of those things we don't often think about, right?
Right, but it does come up in our estate planning practice. Families come in and there's tension sometimes as to whether a child's entitled to an inheritance. And so I want to start with the term entitlement. It refers to a person who believes that they're deserving of special treatment, that by fact they are entitled as a right to something. And so when we get into the issue of an inheritance, I'm going to give two answers today. And I know it's often common for a lawyer to say it depends, right? And so I'm going to go two ways with this. First, I'm going to go with the laws. And the law that would apply is the intestacy law, or intestate succession. And that law is set up state by state. So the answer today is going to also depend on where that individual lives, all right? Now, the intestacy laws say that children are entitled to an inheritance under certain circumstances, all right? So here's a chart for New York. And in New York, if there's a spouse but no children, the spouse gets 100% of the estate. If there's a spouse and children, New York says $50,000 of the estate and half of the balance goes to the spouse. So the spouse gets basically half plus $50,000, and the balance goes to the children equally. So that is somewhat unusual. Most states in the intestacy laws say spouse first, children second. New York says no, spouse and children, there's a sharing of the inheritance. And it gets even more complicated in community property states. New York's not one of them, where California is a community property state. So you really to understand what one is entitled to under the intestate succession law, you have to know what state you're in. But generally, spouse first, children second.
Wow. New
New York's an exception to the rule.
I guess also being explicit is a gigantic help here when you're doing estate planning, right?
Absolutely. Because the question becomes, well, there's this intestate law and the child has a right to an inheritance. But the second answer I wanted to give was that the parents control who inherits their assets. They're not mandated to leave assets to a child. Right. So parents should have a will. And that will should say where their assets are going to go to, who they're going to go to, and in what amounts. And also, you can build in protections for the child. Let's say if the child was disabled, you wouldn't want it to go outright. And so the better approach is for the parents to take control over who they want to leave their assets to and how. But when we get back to these intestate laws, we get into a question of defining who is a child.
Right.
All right? So it's biological children. It's adopted children generally. But if if there was a child out of wedlock, that's still a biological child.
Sure.
But let's say it's a foster child or a stepchild. They're not included.
Wow.
So foster children, stepchildren, you have to have a will or a trust to make sure they're included.
Wow.
And even there's a law in New York, a provision where if a child is conceived and then born after the parent passes, the mother passes, they're treated as a child that's entitled to an inheritance. So it can get complicated.
Wow.
It can get complicated.
What about grandchildren then?
Yes, now we get to the next tier, right? So grandchildren only step in when their parent predeceases their grandparent.
Got it. Okay.
All right? So let's say there were 3 children and child A predeceased their parents and had grandchildren. Those grandchildren would step into the shoes of their parent. The grandchild would step up and be entitled to an inheritance similar to the other children of the parent.
And that's New York State, or is that?
That's a general rule, but that would be New York State. But then you get to the extended family. All right. So let's see the extended family. We go with, well, if there are, if we start with no parents, then it's the siblings. So we go parents. They're not married. They don't have children or grandchildren. Then it goes up to their parents. Then it goes to their siblings. And then if there are no grandparents, then it goes to aunts and uncles.
Wow.
Then it goes to nieces and nephews. Wait, we're not done.
Oh, man.
Eventually, it's going to escheat or pass to the state. So if you don't have immediate family, like we've represented a number of Holocaust survivors, and there were no immediate family members, New York inherits.
Wow.
So, if you have a charity like the Catholic Church,
let's go.
Let's make sure there's a provision for the Catholic Church or your favorite charity. You don't want New York stepping in.
That seems crazy, yeah. And then I'm thinking too, while you're saying this, then we have these kind of famous stories, like Leona Helmsley leaves all the money to her dogs.
Right.
So, and I guess that's also, that the lawyers, there's no law to protect necessarily, $50 million going to a Chihuahua, right?
That's right. So you're Karnak. Remember Karnak?
Yes,
Johnny
right.
Carson?
Yeah.
Because that's one of my next segments.
Oh, is it really?
Is to talk about celebrities and the wills they've had and some of the crazy things that have happened, which could have been avoided. So stay tuned.
Oh, good, because that will clear some of the fog that's here, right?
But we did do a segment on pet trusts, and there is a limit on, there could be a limit on how much you leave to a pet.
Wow, please.
In a pet trust.
Enough, right? Now, I know you have another slide to show us too, right?
Yes. So let's pull up that last slide, which is what we were saying earlier about how to avoid these intestacy laws from applying at all.
Yeah.
And that's the better course. So you can have a last will and testament, you can have a trust, if you can name a beneficiary, for example, a life insurance policy, name a beneficiary, an individual, and by operation of law. So if you have an asset that you own jointly with a right of survivorship, it would automatically go to the other person. So there are options there to avoid the intestacy laws. I suggest doing that.
Oh, sure.
I suggest taking control and do what's appropriate in your heart for what you want to do for your family.
If we want to find out more, your website?
Sure. vjrussolaw.com, vjrussolaw.com. Lots of information there. It's a robust resource center, blogs, the videos. We'll put it in the Legal Know.
My Lord.
On the site.
And my own family went to Vincent, thanks be to God, years ago when we straightened this all out. My parents, goldfish, are getting nothing. So there we go. We've got that worked out. But thank you. Thanks for being with us. It was just very, very helpful as always.
My pleasure. I hope I didn't confuse you.
No, I live in a cloud all the time, so it's fine.